All right, and we're live. And, we really pushed for this presentation with your team because, coming out of Earth Day, it seemed like a very, very relevant topic to be around, that time of the year. And we understand you guys probably had a lot of presentations going on around Earth Day.
We did.
Indeed, we did.
Yes, very busy.
The CCIM San Diego chapter's Lunch and Learn series, where we promote excellence, competency, and collaboration. I'm your host, Doug Tabor, board member of CCIM San Diego, and I'm a rental property broker with KW Commercial. My wonderful co-host this morning, as usual, is fellow board member, Miss Paris Moe. Paris is a sustainability coordinator at Verdani Partners, who happen to also be our speakers today. How are you, Paris?
I'm doing good. Pleased to be here too.
Well, we're delighted to have you here. We really look forward to this presentation. Of course, before we do, we have a few housekeeping items that we need to get in line. All right. Attendees are going to be in listen-only mode. Please use the Q&A box to submit your questions for the panelists. That box will be down below, Q&A. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared following the event on the CCIM San Diego chapter YouTube channel. And our agenda today is pretty simple. For the first half of the hour, roughly, we are going to introduce the speakers. They are going to discuss their topic. Right around halfway through the hour, we will open it up for Q&A. Now, many of you have pre-submitted some questions at the time of registration, so we'll be addressing those questions. And then we always really love the live questions as well. It makes it very interesting. So we'll have questions, Q&A, and then we will be concluding right around 1 p.m. today. And about CCIM San Diego, our chapter is part of the CCIM Institute, which is a global organization. Our chapter really focuses on promoting events such as this one that, like I like to say, promote excellence, competency, and collaboration. And, just a little side note, I haven't mentioned this in the past, but last year, especially like many other organizations, our team over here at CCIM San Diego chapter is really trying to figure out how do we keep the chapter alive from a financial standpoint in the COVID world. The reality is in the past, many of our presentations were done live. You've probably attended some of our live luncheons in the past where we serve a lunch and we have live events. And that was certainly a part of our budget. And then of course, many of the live classes that we host, especially for folks trying to get their designation for becoming a CCIM. But as you know, with COVID, we haven't been able to do that. And so, until we're able to regain those live events, you're probably going to see a small registration fee attached to some of our digital events. We rolled it out on this one. It might've been too soon. We kind of reversed course, which was really on me as the chair of the events. But just know that, we're doing that because in order to continue to provide this excellence content, to keep it very relevant and local, which is our goal, we're going to have to try to pay the bill somehow. So if you see a small registration fee attached to some of our future digital events, think of it as a donation fee. We hope that you continue to attend. We're going to continue to try to make the content very worthwhile, but we do appreciate, of course, your support and your understanding. That said, if you're interested in becoming a CCIM or getting the CCIM designation, which is incredibly helpful for anyone, be it a broker, be it a lender, be it an investor, anyone in the commercial real estate field, reach out to ccimsandiego.com. You can connect to us on our LinkedIn page, or again, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel for more information. And now I'd like to take a moment to thank our generous sponsors for 2021, which, as I just was discussing budget challenges, we really, really appreciate these folks. Of course, platinum sponsors include Heck Solberg, Marcus and Milchap, PMB Healthcare Real Estate, and Savills Global Real Estate Experts. Our gold sponsors are CoStar, Exeter 1031 Exchange Services, Slat Capital, and SCS Engineers. We thank you all for your continued support. And if you would like to sponsor CCIM San Diego with your company, please reach out to us directly. We would love to have your logo up here on our events as well. Okay, we always like to do this. We like to find out who's in the audience. You know about us. Let's find out a little bit more about you. So at this time, we're going to go ahead and put the audience poll on the screen. And I always like to say this is our horse race, because as folks start to fill these out, we get an idea of who is in the audience, and now it's a race. So right now we have 30% brokers, 13% investor owners. We have 30% other. We always wonder, who are the others? Who are the others? Maybe we should expand our list. All right, so interesting. We have 17% owner investors today, 8% lenders, 33% brokers, 8% property managers, and 33% other. Gosh, that other category actually tied for first today with the brokers. Interesting. Ellen, we're going to probably have to go a little more micro on our audience poll in the future. So thanks for everybody participating in the audience poll. We appreciate it. And let's see, where are we on the introduction? Okay. Well, now that we've done the poll, normally I introduce speakers, but today, because she works with them, I am going to ask our fellow board member and co-host, Ms. Paris Mo, to do the introductions today. Paris?
Thanks, Doug. And thank you everyone for tuning in. As usual, hope you're all doing well. So today we'll be exploring commercial real estate's role in reducing carbon emissions, and what does the trend of net zero mean for our industry in particular, and why this is important, as well as the strategies to achieve net zero for real estate portfolios. And as a premier commercial real estate education nonprofit in San Diego, the CCIM San Diego chapter wants to deliver you forward-looking subjects as well as industry fundamentals, as we always do in our webinar program, to promote learning and growth of knowledge. And we do recognize the rising importance and impact of sustainability and climate change related initiatives and regulations of commercial real estate. So for the month of Earth Day celebration, we are pleased to have Ms. Danielle Horton, the CEO and founder of Verdani Partners, and Ms. Jessica Loper, VP of Verdani Partners and Sustainability Director of Commonwealth, to present you the global race to net zero. Verdani Partner is a full-service sustainability and ESG consulting firm with over 20 years of experience in sustainable real estate, with a mission to empower organizations with cost-effective strategies to create sustainable buildings and communities. Both Danielle and Jessica brings over 50 years of experience in the industry and can talk fluently about the subject. And now I'll offer the floor to Danielle and Jessica.
Thank you, Paris, for the introduction. We're really excited to be here today to talk about such an important topic. And I think even if you're on LinkedIn, you're seeing or listening to the news, all these companies making those net zero commitments, what's driving these commitments, and what does this mean for the real estate sector? So we want to talk a little more about kind of what's, what's happening in the market and what's driving this trend. So we wanted to start with what are some of the key industry drivers? I think it's also important to understand from a scientific perspective, what's driving these kind of urgent need to kind of manage our carbon emissions. And in terms of where these carbon emissions are coming from, I think with population growth and a lot of greenhouse gases that we're putting out there, we have something called our carbon budget, which is the amount of carbon that the world can emit while still being able to limit global temperature rise to a certain temperature. Right now, we're trying to limit the temperature to 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And at the moment, we have used half of that budget. And when we look at our warming projections, I mean, what the scientific community recommends is that we stay below 1.5 degrees, that even with like, more than 2 degrees could lead to more of like those kind of, what we're seeing in terms of like sea level rise with the fires, the droughts. So in terms of the warming projections too, even with the optimistic net zero targets, we're still not hitting some of the kind of recommended um, reduction targets. So it's really important that we work together as a community in terms of like trying to reduce our carbon emissions. So for example, according to the Intergovernmental Plan on Climate Change, their recommendation is to stay below 1.5 degrees. But if we continue, and which would require us to like cut our emissions in half by 2030 and reach net zero carbon emissions by mid-century. If we continue at current emission levels, this budget is expected to be used in just over 9 years. And so when you hear people saying like the next 10 years will be very critical, and it's really important that we manage our carbon emissions in the next 10 years, that's because that's the scientific basis beyond supporting that. What's the real estate role in terms of like kind of managing our emissions? I think 40%, for example, 40% of our carbon emissions come from buildings. And there's a lot of things in terms of like from when you look at our the building operations sector also. And when you think about new buildings, the real estate industry, including construction industry, right, it's responsible for almost more than a third of the world's energy consumption. And so it's really critical that real estate is a part of the solution. And we are really excited that the U.S. formally rejoined the Paris Agreement, as a big, and U.S. is one of the largest energy use per capita on a global scale. And it's really important that we're part of the solution. In terms of the role, like the kind of building efficiency and carbon reduction nexus, we already talked about, that we need to cut emissions by almost half by 2030. And, for example, 99% of our buildings are also existing, 75% are due for efficiency retrofits, and they're responsible for a big part of those emissions. So it's really critical that the building sector is a big part of the solution to reduce our carbon emissions. It's also important to understand US trends or policies that are trying to align with those kind of global commitments. For example, we have a lot of benchmarking ordinances. So anyone in real estate that are mandating disclosure, just like you see the label on restaurants showing how like ABCD, it's also kind of giving energy scores about how buildings are performing, and in certain places making that scoring transparent. So if your building is inefficient, they're going to be less competitive in the market. We also have a huge trend, a lot of like states and cities making 100% commitments to renewable energy. California and 31 other states have made commitments. We have a lot of places that have energy codes that are driving to net zero. 18 cities have committed to 100% renewable energy. 8 states and territories have also commitment to 100% renewable energy. And 6 cities in the US have already achieved 100% clean energy goals, which is really excited and show that this is possible. We're going to see this huge trend pushing our building sector toward electrification, so less dependence on fossil fuels like natural gas, and a bigger push to decarbonization. And we also have a new federal commitment that's going to enhance our transformation required to reach net zero emissions by 2050. And the Biden administration also recently set a new aggressive goal to reduce 50% reduction in greenhouse gases based on 2005 levels by 2030, which is double the goals that were set by the Obama administration. We're also seeing, for example, in California, for example, city of Berkeley is the first city to prohibit natural gas infrastructure in new buildings and require new construction to have all electric infrastructure. There's a lot of other cities that are going to follow along. There's something called REACH codes. So we're going to really see as an industry, we're going to get more and more pressure to kind of electrify buildings, to make buildings more efficient. From a business case too, like there's a lot of benefits. I mean, California, we have been working toward, when we look at our energy use on a per capita basis for the country, in California, the energy use on a per capita base for California is a lot lower from the rest of the country because we have those aggressive kind of like energy targets. We have, for example, on a per capita basis, our energy use stayed flat versus 50% increase across the rest of the country, which helped us avoid, having to build over 50 new power plants, cut a lot of millions of tons of pollutants. Efficiency jobs grew by 15% versus 2% across the country. And there's a lot of benefits. It also saves California over $75 billion since the 1970s via our more aggressive codes and standards. And we saved over $12 billion from energy efficiency programs. When we look at also the price of electricity, when we're looking at, moving to renewable energy and like decarbonizing, it's also important to understand that our, fossil fuels, natural gas, oil, it's heavily subsidized. Previously, like US fossil fuel subsidies exceeded the Pentagon spending. And right now, even without those subsidies, the price for electricity from solar declined 89% in the last 10 years. When you look at here, the price for solar compared to other things, and so it's already kind of getting cheaper than coal. When you think about the business case too, the green economy has grown so much in the US that it employs around 10 times as many people as the fossil fuel industry. Despite the past decades oil and gas boom and our heavy subsidies to fossil fuels, the green economy is worth 1.3 trillion, or about 70% of US GDP. So when we also think about the costs of, decarbonizing or meeting those tough climate targets, for example, the estimated cost for meeting the toughest 1.5 degrees climate target is about $0.5 trillion over the next 30 years, but it will save the world over $30 trillion in damage. In California, we have America's biggest clean energy and carbon reduction goals, and we have faster economic growth than the US national average. When it comes to the business case for the real estate industry as well, even with, for example, what's happening with the COVID crisis and the pandemic, sustainable funds, companies that have a deeper penetration of environmental social governance programs, or that are focusing on efficiency and sustainability, these companies are also outperforming the market. So it doesn't mean that being sustainable, it means you're going to spend more money. Every single one of our clients are working on environmental social governance programs. It's all financially driven. This makes better business. This is about staying competitive in the market and watching where the industry is going. So sustainable funds, they attracted record inflows in the last in the first quarter, amid the market turmoil. And according to Morningstar, these funds also have outperforming conventional funds, and they have outperformed not only in the short term but long term as well. And so even during the pandemic, ESG investing is a winning strategy. I mean, as a company working on ESG, we're seeing that even ourselves, there's a tremendous demand for sustainability. Like we hire 15 people just in the past kind of 3-4 months. And so even though also financial performance is the main driver, ESG investment is also popular for its social and environmental impacts. I mean, with the pandemic, focus on health is also really critical right now. And institutional investors are really pushing companies and increasing mandates for ESG, forcing real estate funds and companies to adapt. And so the COVID crisis is only heightening the growing pressure to strengthen ESG requirements and accelerate this trend for a more sustainable approach to investing, which represents a major shift in the industry. And this kind of, when we talk about the business case, this pressure is also coming from, it's also coming from investors. We have a lot of investors that our clients work with, like CalPERS, I mean, we see an example from BlackRock. They're also like requiring companies to make certain commitments, whether it's like aligning with sustainable development goals or making net zero targets. So we're seeing a lot of changes. This is a recent like BlackRock stewardship expectations, and they are saying there are key changes to their policies to address board quality, to transition to a low carbon economy, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so there's also a big impact that sustainability related factors can have on a company's ability to generate long-term risk-adjusted returns. And they also expected to see companies to align their underlying business model with the goal of limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees and reaching net zero greenhouse gases by 2050. So these also have like impacts on kind of how they vote and who they do business with. So it's really important that real estate companies are following along and trying to understand these shifts in the industry toward decarbonization, electrification. So what does that mean? When you talk about the global race to net zero, how we're getting some more granular in terms of like how that applies to the building sector. So in terms of the kind of global race to net zero and also the definition for buildings, but the IPCC defines net zero as a point when man-made emissions of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere are balanced by removals over a specific period. And the Paris Agreement also sets out the need to achieve this balance by the second half of this century. So basically, if you have a certain amount of emissions that you're putting out, you also need to remove it so that the amount you're putting out is the same as the amount you're removing, so that the overall impact equals to zero. So it's also important to understand the difference between net zero energy versus net zero carbon. Net zero energy is when a building produces at least as much energy as it consumes annually. This can be done on-site or off-site. But the definition of net zero carbon and carbon neutral buildings, when greenhouse gas emissions are minimized at all stages, including embodied carbon associated with the manufacturing process. So is, emissions that occur balanced by positive initiatives so that the net carbon footprint over time is zero. And this, when we're looking at large real estate portfolios, we're not necessarily looking at putting solar panels in the buildings. There's a lot of other ways you can achieve that net zero carbon emissions. And Jessica's going to talk more about that. In terms of like frameworks, right? What does that mean when someone makes a net zero commitment? They are typically aligned with like an industry framework. There's a lot of like key frameworks out there, including Better Buildings Partnership, World Green Building Council, ULI Greenprint, their science-based targets. So it's very exciting to see the number of organizations that also have made these net zero commitments. For the US, also the ULI Greenprint group is one benefit is that, we're really also, even if all these organizations haven't totally figured this out, they're really working together and sharing best practices to learn from one another so they can kind of achieve those goals together. And there's many well-known firms like Kilroy, LaSalle, Commonwealth, Jamestown, Netflix. I mean, there's so many like on real estate companies also that have made these commitments. And companies like Kilroy and Hudson Pacific, they already met their targets. So I think it's also when we are thinking about 2050, we need to achieve this in the next 10 years. This is achievable and this can be done. It doesn't necessarily need to take 30 years. Just because our topic is global race toward net zero, we also wanted to give you a little very high level overview of what's happening in different countries. But many other countries have also made net zero commitment, whether they've achieved it, their commitments are in law, or there's proposed legislation on it. But I think the big thing is also like China, which, China and the US are some of the bigger, carbon emitters that China has made a net zero commitment by 2060, and that's in law. Japan also has one in law. For example, and there's many other places. For example, Nicaragua, they've achieved 98% electrification and 97% renewables. So it's just, this is kind of something we need to achieve together on a global scale. It's not something that any one country is going to achieve alone. So we have one planet, like one Earth. And so it's really exciting to see this global commitment and these different countries working together toward that. And now Jessica's going to go, I'm going to stop sharing, and she's going to go a little deeper into how organizations are achieving these commitments.
Great. Thanks, Danielle. Yeah, so what we have been talking about so far is, kind of a higher level, but now we really want to figure out how do we make these steps? What's the pathway? And so if we're thinking about our pathway to achieve net zero, what does that look like? And there's some hot topic items that you've probably have heard of. And so we'll just go into those a little bit. And we've developed this pathway as a little tool to help figure out those top strategies for commercial real estate portfolios to achieve the net zero targets. So it starts with making embodied carbon reductions. We'll talk about what that is during new construction and major renovations. Energy efficiency is an important next step, which includes tenant engagement and is the most cost-effective solution for carbon reductions. Then comes electrification, which consists of green power through the utility grid coupled with building electrification. Next is on-site renewables, including solar. Rounding off with balancing the remaining emissions with off-site renewables, renewable energy credits, and carbon offsets. And then finally, to maintain a sustainable and net zero carbon it's critical to focus on that closed loop energy systems and a circular economy. So let's get to know our emissions a little bit. You may have heard about these different types of emissions. There's 3 types of emissions that we'll go into, and they are scope 1 and 2 are emissions that are from building operations. Scope 1 is emissions coming from fuels burned on site like natural gas. That's where you'll see that. Scope 2 is going to be your electricity and other indirect sources of power. And then scope 3 is emissions that are from up and downstream activities and are not controlled by the building owner, but related to operations. So something like employee travel is where you'll look at that. So we have a timeline. When you see portfolios suggest a 2050 timeline, here's just a sample you can see that we've put together of what that looks like. And most industry commitments, like Danielle mentioned, are by 2050, but this is not as aggressive as we need it to be. It really needs to be a 2030 emissions target, which we've also developed as well, kind of meeting you where you're at. So we don't have that carbon budget for 30 years, but at least we start a process to feel comfortable, kind of get your feet wet, understanding what is it to take that next step. And so giving you the opportunity to make more of a bold action. And we're recommending that our clients achieve this within 10 years. So you may have heard about embodied carbon. It's definitely a hot topic, and that is where carbon emissions are released not only during operational life, but also during the manufacturing, transportation, construction, and end-of-life phases of all built assets, so building and infrastructure. And these emissions commonly are referred to as embodied carbon that have largely been overlooked historically, but contribute to about 11% of the global carbon emissions, which is kind of big. So we really want to look at those carbon emissions and that are released before, sorry, I knocked them out. These emissions that are released before the building or infrastructure begins to be used. Sometimes we'll call those upfront carbon, and that's responsible for half of the entire carbon footprint of new construction. So between now and 2050, threatening to consume a large part of our remaining carbon budget. So we're really looking at that new construction. So energy efficiency, property managers, this one's for you, is how do we get these energy efficiency measures? It's an important step towards net zero targets to make the building operations as efficient as possible. This means retrofitting existing equipment with energy efficient replacements. Ongoing commissioning of building systems is an important strategy to maximize building efficiency, and it would also result in reduced operations expenses, which creates value. And then finally, this part's for the property managers, is since building occupants are responsible for most of the energy consumed in the building, tenant engagement and education and awareness resulting in that behavioral change are key to increasing the performance. So this is an example of posters that we provide to our office or industrial or residential units. It can really be versatile, but helps tell the story, give little tips and tricks, and it really helps see where you can make simple steps, and it can be fun. So next is the power grid and building electrification. And this is where we really need to be an industry driver to reduce the reliance on fossil fuels and minimize that climate risk through electrification. So new construction buildings can plan for fully electric assets during construction, but for those existing buildings, strategies including electrifying mechanical equipment, installing EV charging stations, to electrify the transportation sector, and then tracking the sources of our utilities power are important. And did you know that your utility company is likely to already be sourcing your building's power from renewable sources? And many of those utilities publish that power content label, which you can see here, and that's called a power mix. But there still are places that still don't do that. So it's up to us to demand that transparency and industry movement toward those renewables. So taking that into consideration, you can see a power mix here. So if you have a portfolio of properties and you want to understand your total percent of renewable energy, just right off the bat, understanding where your utility company, you'll need to put that down on a total electricity at each property of your reporting year. And then you can identify based on the utility what the breakdown of where that electricity is generated. And then depending on that utility company will indicate whether like large hydropower and nuclear is considered renewable. But if you go by Energy Star and LEED definitions, those actually are not included as renewable. So you have to kind of understand where those sources are coming from. And then you can see in this pie chart that electricity can still come from natural gas. So it's still a large fuel for electricity by utilities. So you're educating yourself on the status, and then you can figure out what are your next steps from that point. You're just understanding here. So can you do on-site renewables? That's an option. So that's a first step with on-site renewables, is to evaluate, see where they can fit, see if they would produce enough power to be worth the investment, and then look for ideal climates. And some options can be limited, for example, high-rise or amenitized rooftops. This can be overwhelming, but you don't need to be a solar expert. You can work with a vendor who would be the expert for you. And a best practice we recommend would be to work with the owner's rep who analyze the whole portfolio. And vendors we suggest to work are companies like Black Bear Energy and Wonder Capital that can help. And here's a little case study from Clarion Partners, which is an industrial portfolio who partnered with their tenant Amazon to install solar at their properties across the US. And if you have the space, solar is a win-win between the tenant and the landlord. So it's something to really consider and communicate with. Then we look at offsite renewables. So you don't have space on your property. So let's think about offsite renewables, and especially when you're thinking about existing buildings. So some real estate companies have already achieved their net zero targets using virtual power purchasing agreements, or VPPAs, you may have heard. And we believe they will be an important tool in meeting the net zero targets in certain locations. And like solar, you don't need to be an expert in offsite renewables. A vendor that you can look into for this is Transparent Energy or Constellation Energy. And carbon offsets are an important last step for existing building in the final year of a net zero commitment, and looking at those to close any remaining gaps in emissions. So that's not where you're starting. You're starting with energy reduction. And then when you just don't have any other place to go, then you look here is the next step. And then I want to talk about circular economy. So what is that? That's a concept aimed at eliminating waste and the continual use of resources. So the pillar of circular economy, a true circular economy, demands a comprehensive approach to resource efficiency. So one that not only addresses the use of raw materials, but also energy resources. And today's renewables like solar and wind energy are becoming increasingly viable alternatives to fossil fuels. And this is a way to pave the way to a sustainable future. We need to continually improve on our production processes and our energy supply. So knowing where it's coming from. And then transforming the energy system. So society is increasingly calling for industrial production to become more sustainable. And this demand is really now yielding results at a political level. So for example, the EU aims to, I believe Danielle mentioned, to be climate neutral by 2050. And one of the first steps is to achieving this goal is decarbonizing energy and expanding wind and solar power. And there's two types of systems, which are open and closed systems. And these two are distinguished according to how they relate to the environment. So if you look at the open system, it's where materials and resources are continually entering the system through extraction, are consumed, and then are removed from the system as waste. So an example here are resources such as food and water are brought into our homes, consumed, and then discarded into sewers and landfills. And these materials are resources that have an end life. And open systems are linear and are not considered sustainable in a traditional sense. Then when we look at closed systems, those are kind of in nature, and it's a cyclical system in which materials and resources are consumed and then reused or recycled. So an example here would be dead and decaying plants become fertilizer, which helps other plants grow. So closed systems are considered sustainable because no waste is produced and there is no end life. And like the closed system, in nature, the goal for sustainable systems is green buildings to continually reuse and recycle materials and resources. So you're thinking about what's going in your building and just taking a quick step of, do I need to keep buying those styrofoam coffee cups, or should I get reusable coffee cups? And then closing here, we've got some challenges. So wrapping up, there's different challenges depending on where you're sitting at the corporate level or at the asset level. With the corporate level, you need to understand budgeting considerations for all the assets, who has the greatest concern, and does it make sense to put capital towards a specific efficiency measure. But then when you're looking at asset level challenges, these are things that we may not have control over, which boils down to tenant, space, and money. So trying to find the right stakeholder engagement programs are necessary to get the buy-in from your tenants, making strategic budgeting requests that make sense for the location for on-site or off-site renewables. So how do we get home? Driving this home would be, obtaining that tenant energy data, achieving energy efficiency benchmarks and reductions, and budgeting for that on-site renewable energy and carbon offsetting. And I'll switch on over to Danielle on the highlights of this.
Thank you, Jessica. Yeah, no, that was really helpful. I hope that you it's like when when I teach sustainable real estate and we talk about sustainability, I know that's not a topic that has been explored as much with this group. This is not what we start with. We don't start with net zero. This is like what we end with. So kudos to you for hanging there while we talk about a more high level topic. Net zero can be very complex, but this is a really important topic in our industry, and it's important to kind of have a general understanding about net zero and what's happening with the industry. So in terms of like just an overview about some of the things we talked about, we understood that like some of the key drivers to net zero include like investors, regulatory drivers, climate change, reputational risks, that need for us as a society to kind of limit global warming, to keep temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. We really need to kind of cut our emissions in half. So we're going to have to work together, public sector, private sector, real estate is going to need to be a big part of that. In terms of like making those commitments, some of the ones for the US market, some of the recommended frameworks that we recommend include like the ULI Greenprint one. And there's a lot of organizations that you may already know that have already made those commitments. We have several clients that are also considering. So we're going to see this list growing. But like Commonwealth Partners, which is a portfolio that Jessica manages, has made a commitment. Heitzman, Hudson Pacific, Jamestown, Kilroy, LaSalle, a lot of big names here, New Van, the tower companies have made those net zero commitments. And I think one thing to understand too, what does those commitments entail is that to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050, these commitments usually are like scope 1 and 2 emissions. I know it's like getting to the weeds of the emissions, but those are the easier ones that we have more control of. So that includes exclude occupant operations. So it's also in terms of the scope, like the ULI Greenprint one, it's dealing with emissions that are under directly operational control. So things that you can control. So that also exclude like tenant controlled spaces where they are in control of their own energy use. So this is kind of in terms of like making the commitment, and also by 2050, that's 30 years from now. I think by that point, so for example, like what Jessica mentioned, in one of our portfolios for Commonwealth, 60% of our power is already coming from renewable energy sources. So even when you're trying to offset 100% of your emissions, there's a lot of other factors that are going to help you get there. And so you might not need to offset 100%, maybe you're dealing with that 40%. And then just an overview of the key strategies to achieve net zero, like embodied carbon is going to be really important in dealing with, especially when you talk about new construction, materials to select. Energy efficiency is something that a lot of, the industry has been focusing on for a long time. That's also really continued to be a key part of the solution. So power grid electrification, as we mentioned, we're going to continue to do that. And we need our buildings to get ready to meet the demand, not only in eliminating the gas stoves, electrifying, making sure we build the infrastructure to plugging electric vehicles as well. So it's really kind of getting the building sector ready for that new way we're going to generate energy. So just making sure that we're moving toward that building electrification, and kind of our power grid is also getting cleaner. On-site renewables is a great way, but it's also like, it depends if you have space in the building for solar. Like obviously industrial assets has a lot of roof space. You can also put it in parking lots. The combination of solar and battery storage is also very promising. So we're going to see more push for on-site renewables. I think locally too in San Diego, there's a lot of rebate programs in incentivizing buildings to install solar. And off-site renewables are going to be a huge part of the solution. When we're making a commitment as a portfolio, the off-site renewables, like virtual power purchase agreements, this is really how companies are achieving those net zero goals, is by making those virtual power purchase agreements, where you're making those commitments to to purchase the power for your portfolio, and you're making that 20-year agreement, and we can lock yourself at a much better rate where the energy costs are continuing to go up. So it's a good business decision as well, and you can secure renewable energy power for your entire portfolio. This is how companies like Kilroy or that's definitely a big part of how they're accomplishing that, is by doing those virtual power purchase agreements. And the circular economy that is in those closed loop systems, that's also going to be, we're going to continue to hear more and more about that, because we can't continue to just extract and have that linear process where extracting and going to landfill. With more people, we have to kind of push toward the kind of closed loop systems and reusing a regenerative model to kind of work more like nature. There's more and more of us, and we have limited resources. So switching to a circular economy is going to be a really important part of it. So that's kind of high level overview of kind of all the things we discussed today. And I think with that, we can open up for questions if anyone has any questions.
So thank you, Jessica and Danielle, for that wonderful presentation. No live questions yet. I'm sure everyone's still digesting the presentation. But we did receive some questions from attendees at registration, and let's go through those first as the live questions roll in. All right, so first off, we'd like to know if you could educate us on how increasing carbon dioxide level is impacting the environment and sustainability, and what sources should we turn to for more evidence and understanding?
Yeah, I think we touched a little bit on that. I mean, the key driver, and I mean, I have some slides on that, but it's really clear when we see the trail of like population growth, it's directly correlated with the graph of increasing carbon emissions. So there's more of us, it's more power, but it's also because most of our power come from fossil fuels. It's like, we're putting a lot of smoke in the air. And so like, we need to cut that, we need to stop that. We need to stop those carbon emissions from going to the air so that we can balance that. I think on the scientific side is consensus. I mean, we're a big part of like causing climate change and those effects. And we're seeing those things. I mean, when you see the droughts, the fires, the, intense hurricanes, sea level rise. I mean, we're seeing the effects of climate change right now. And that is causing like billions of dollars in damages. So it's really important that we understand what's causing it, and we're taking action toward addressing it.
Thank you, Danielle. Okay. The second one is, what are the keys to reaching net zero energy for existing buildings by tenants or lessees? What can they do to contribute to this?
And Jessica, just chime in too if you want to answer any of these. But 60%, over 60% of energy consumption in a building is typically responsibility of tenants. So I mean, I think it's really critical that they're a big part of the solution. There's only so much that owners and landlords can control in terms of like, where you have tenant improvement guidelines, you have a base building that's efficient, you can have certain measures. And we also do a lot of work with tenant behavior strategies, so that it's like, you can have efficient lights, but if you leave them on all the time. So there's a lot of things that you can do from a behavior perspective, but there's also a lot of collaboration. Like when there's things called green leases, where you can do things that are mutually beneficial from landlord and the tenant. So we do, for example, when we do energy efficiency retrofits, we also can share some of that cost to tenants as an operating expense, so that both tenants and landlord are sharing both the costs and the benefits of those improvements. And we saw in the case of Clarion with their industrial portfolio, their diversified portfolio, but a lot of their assets are industrial, where you can really work with the tenants, because you both need to be on the same page to be able to make some of those things work, whether it's energy efficiency, whether it's installing renewable energy. It's much easier when the landlord and the tenants aligned. So I think that by working together, we can achieve a lot more.
Thank you. And which country is doing the best job so far when it comes to net zero? How does US compare to everyone else?
I think, well, I think before US is like more like we're 25%. No, we're like 5% of the world's population, but we use 25% of the world's resources. When we look at our energy use on a per capita basis, we're like, I think, US and China are one of the worst offenders in terms of like causing the most damage. And I think because, so I think it's really important that we are a big part of the solution. I mean, there's definitely other countries that are ahead of us in terms of like already, achieving those commitments. I had shown some of those slides, like Suriname, Bhutan had already made those commitments. I mean, we know places like Sweden, Denmark, they have already, their percentage of renewable energy power is very high. So I think especially those countries where that's already in law, they've made a lot more progress. Where, I mean, even like Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Uruguay, they're making great progress in increasing their percentage of renewables. So I think it's really exciting to see right now, places like countries like China and the US that need to be a huge part of the solution, taking action. Because also a lot of the poor countries that have nothing to do with causing the problem are also getting the greatest brunt of it, and they may not have the resources to act, where they're being heavily negatively impacted by it. They're not causing it, nor they have the resources to invest in the solutions the same way we do. So we have a moral obligation in being a huge part of the solution and actually leading. And I'm really excited to see us taking more proactive action on that.
Well, we have some space to improve. That's not a bad thing too, I guess. Already we see some live questions rolling in. Could you answer for us, where does your company step into the process with new construction projects? Is Verdani Partners a consultant?
Yeah, we're a full service ESG consulting firm. So we typically work with large real estate portfolios as an owner's rep in like all different facets of the building life cycle, from new construction to existing building operations, acquisitions, dispositions. We help more on the strategic level in helping our clients make those commitments, implement those strategies. So for new construction, we have a new construction renovations guide to kind of have those guidelines when working with your design team, with your contractor, to make sure they're meeting certain things. And like for new construction, is like install your master meters in the beginning so you can track how your building's performing. It's like, making sure that we're looking at materials from embodied carbon, how your building addresses biodiversity, or making it as efficient as possible during the new construction phase. So it's really important. So like I think all the different, in terms of like the built environment in real estate, we work more as an owner's rep. Like I was a head of sustainability for a real estate company for almost 10 years before starting Verdani, and a lot of our team members have a lot of experience. And so we basically work with those real estate portfolios in kind of their strategic decisions and ongoing implementation of those environmental social governance programs over time.
Sounds good. And along the same vein, does Verdani offer consultant services in developing tenant outreach programs for landlords? And can you talk a little bit about the specifics of that?
Jessica, do you want to talk about that? She said some incredible programs of tenants.
Right. Yeah, we are. I think that's a high priority, because if you have a lot of tenants within your building and you have initiatives, if you don't have them on board, it's not going to work. So you need to figure out, and it needs to be a constant stream. So what we've done with our clients, so it is with our clients, it's a portfolio of properties depending on, if it's diversified or solely office or multifamily, anything like that. We will tailor it to that type of service, and we typically do various, let's say Earth Day. So we have Earth Day events, and we promote different material for that, giving tips and tricks, keeping it positive, promotional, exciting, and something new. So that way tenants can see, oh, well, that's a great idea. We could try that. We've implemented bees on rooftops for that kind of social component, and creating just sort of a sense of community, especially during last year, creating these virtual events. So even though we had typical, waste awareness months, we were still able to manage a virtual event of showing that, and even still e-waste events, having the ability to collect material, making sure that people are disposing in the right spot. You can still educate and keep it fun. And that's kind of our goal.
Yep. Thank you, Jessica. And then the last one, could you educate us on the process of disposing solar energy panels?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I don't know. That's our area of expertise and how those are disposed. I guess not, no, everything has its environmental impact. And, I hope that, we can reuse a lot of the components of a solar panel and avoid as much as possible going to the landfills. But I don't know. I think it's still, this kind of solar boom is still new, that I think they're still within their life cycle, that I'm not sure how the industry is having to deal with a massive amount of solar panels to dispose at the moment. But so I don't have a great answer on that.
No worries. Is there any sources, maybe one, whoever is interested could look into or contact for more information on just solar panel and the installation and disposal in general?
Well, I think those types of vendors like Black Bear Energy and Wonder Capital that we spoke about, there's different types of companies out there that are there to help with resources like that. So it's just kind of doing your homework on who is the niche of that particular component.
I see. Sounds good. And I do have one last question I would like to ask on behalf of the audience and I guess myself. Could you share some of the key risk considerations when it comes to net zero when considering new acquisitions or new construction opportunities?
Yeah, some of the things that we do as part of the new acquisitions phase, or even new construction, is like we do like risk assessments on behalf of our clients for new acquisitions, where we look at different ESG metrics, including like how efficient building is. We look at kind of resiliency and climate risks. So I think understanding those types of risks can help our clients make better decisions in terms of like which asset to buy. And I think with new construction as well, it's really important, like where we have our new construction renovation guidelines, to be making sure that that's such an important phase of the building life cycle, to make sure that we're making the right decisions, including when we talk about net zero, right? Making sure we have the infrastructure for EV charging stations, that we're already making the building full electric that's not dependent on natural gas. So there's a lot of decisions that happen during the new acquisitions or new development phase that will support all of this. So it has to be incorporated holistically in every part of the building's life cycle.
A quick example would be thinking about, let's say, a property in Boston. If for new construction, where are you developing your equipment? Making sure it's on the second floor, let's say, instead of ground floor. So if there is a chance of flooding, you're making sure it's all elevated. If you are considering an acquisition of an existing building, do you need to maybe purchase an aqua fence that would go around the property to help ensure that the property stays safe? So there's strategies that we look at with our new acquisitions and due diligence metrics for those particular questions.
Thank you. Thank you again for entertaining all of our questions, Danielle and Jessica. And thank you so much for the audience for participating. Back to you, Doug.
All right. Thank you, everybody. On behalf of CCIM San Diego chapter, we really appreciate you spending the time and doing this presentation today. For a list of our upcoming events, please go and check out our CCIM San Diego YouTube page. If you want a refresh of this event, it will be posted on there in the next 24 to 48 hours. Also, I believe we're going to send out a link to that event as well as the contact information for our speakers today at Verdani Partners. Again, a big thank you for spending the time for that information on net zero. Sounds like there's going to be a price tag involved, so check in next month when we have local economist and luminary Mr. Alan Nevin, and he is going to be doing a discussion on the state of the economy and providing an update called, what his title is, As the World Heals. So it's going to be a good talk. And for CCIM San Diego and my co-host, Ms. Paris Moe, my name is Doug Tabor. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next month. Bye-bye.
See you. Goodbye.